Welcome to the Year City Podcast, where we get to know our neighbors so that we can be good neighbors. I'm your host, Aaron Williams, and before we get to our guest today, we're going to say a thank you to our sponsor. Our sponsor for today is Polymathic. Polymathic is focused on promoting community and local living. If you'd like to work with them on these goals, reach out with an email to contact@polymathic.company. Today, I am joined by Neal Embry, who is the community editor for the Homewood Star, which is a local publication. We're going to talk to him about the Homewood Star, how it informs the community, and what inspired him to work in local media. Neal, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you work for the Homewood Star, which is owned by Starnes Media.
Starnes Media, yep. So Starnes has 7 monthly newspapers, and so 5 of those are focused on over the mountain areas. So you've got Homewood, you've got Hoover, Vestavia, you've got Mountain Brook, and then you've got our 280 Living paper, which oversees the 280 corridor in Chelsea. And so I serve as editor for Homewood and for our Vestavia paper as well. And then we also have a paper that serves Trustful, and we have a paper that serves downtown Birmingham. So we've got a lot.
And it's not like, hey, we're trying to be like ABC News where we're generalizing the news. Each of these is very specific.
They're very, hyper local news is really our focus. That's really where we want to hone in at. You know, there are other media outlets in town that report state news and report large regional news, and not that we never do that, but we always want to focus on the local news that no one else really, for the most part, is picking up. That's really, we fill that void that was left by the downsizing of some other media outlets. So.
And when you guys are focusing, let's say, on Homewood, right? Like you guys are finding stories specific to Homewood. It's not just like, hey, we're just a news outlet that's parroting other news outlets.
Sure.
Like each of these are unique.
Yeah, they're unique. We're very connected within the community to schools, businesses, city council, different things going on in the community. I think if you were to read our papers, I would venture to say that probably 90% of what you read in our paper is not going to be found in any other outlet. You know, every now and then, of course, some stories do get large and they attract, other eyes. But for the most part, we really do provide and take a lot of pride in being the only truly hyper-local publication in the area.
Gotcha. And when you guys are looking for different types of stories,
Sure.
what are you focusing on? What does Starnes Media say? Oh, that's catching our attention. We should put that in there. What kind of information are you trying to put out there?
So I think a lot of our focus is we're always trying to keep our readers in mind. So we cover our council meetings, Chamber of Commerce meetings, stories that have an impact on any city projects that are ongoing, any city news topics. So right now in Homewood, there's discussion of changing the form of government and bringing in a city manager or a city administrator. We've covered, huge issues in the past, like the downtown rezoning issue and the lid bill that caps the city's property tax revenues. All of these are issues that really matter to residents that may not be picked up anywhere else. But for us, that's what we're looking at, is what matters to our readers, what's going on in the city, whether it's city government or an organization, if it's a feature on a really interesting person. We do our best to cover the school system as well. And then, of course, local business, in these smaller communities. Business is such a big part, not just from a revenue standpoint, but from giving a community meaning, especially in Homewood. You've got the 18th Street shops that are really iconic for the area that bring in a lot of visitors. And so keeping tabs on new businesses, business anniversaries, things like that are really important to us. And then we also provide sports coverage as well.
Okay. Like the schools, like
school
the local
sports.
schools?
Yeah. So we've got our sports editor, Kyle Parmley, has been with us for probably 6 or 7 years now. I'm not 100% sure, but he was there when I got to Starnes in 2018. And so he is our sports editor for all 7 of our publications. So we cover too many schools for me to count. But yeah, so for Homewood, that's Homewood High School and John Carroll Catholic High School. And so we'll go and cover football games, basketball, baseball, softball, all of those sports that, that people care about. And so,
well, so you guys have to have people bringing this to you. Do y'all go and get it? How do you
It's a
How
little
do
bit
you
of
stay
both.
connected to the community and find all this?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both. We are in council meetings. We are on social media. We're in. One of the things that has struck me, both in Homewood and in Vestavia as well, is the Facebook groups of that people will create where they will share
The what's
the show
happenings?
what's happening groups, right? And those, never in a million years when I first got into journalism did I think that would be a place where you'd find story ideas, but that's where you see what people are talking about, and so you see what matters to people, and sometimes it goes beyond, hey, I lost my dog, please help me find him, and you really do get an interesting news story there, and so people bring those ideas to us. I'm constantly, probably on a daily basis, or at least several times a week, I'll get emails or phone calls suggesting stories. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. And a lot of them really do, they do matter. We'll get businesses that will send those story ideas to us. We're in contact with our sources, whether that's city council, business owners, chamber of commerce. We've got sources at the school system. And that really is where we try to thrive, is
Yeah.
building that network of sources that we can call on and say, hey, what's going on this month? And so we are monthly, and so we do a lot of planning in advance. And so it's helpful to be able to just call on those people and brainstorm. And we do try to take state and national issues and localize them as well. We've localized the problems with inflation, the supply chain issues. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we spent an incredible amount of ink focusing on how that impacted our communities.
Hmm.
We weren't reporting national news, but we localized. What does this mean for Homewood? What does this mean for the school system? What does this mean for businesses?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's the impact on everyday people? And so that is something that we try to do.
Gotcha. So you're a community editor, you said, for Homewood and
And
Vestavia.
Vestavia.
What does a community editor do? What are some of your responsibilities?
So my main responsibilities, while I'm in an editor role, my main responsibilities still really involve reporting and writing. That's really the meat and potatoes of what I do. On a daily basis, it's
Okay.
taking time to call people. Was actually what I was doing before I came over here, was sending out emails, making phone calls, sending messages, trying to get information for stories, and then writing those stories. And then obviously, as an editor, I'm editing. Um, so we have Eric Taunton, who's one of our community reporters. So our readers will, if they're not already, will be familiar with him in coming months as he takes on more responsibility. And so I'll edit his stories and communicate with him about where he is on a certain story if he needs help. So we have our internal system as well, where we are listing our stories, where we are communicating about photos, and we have the actual layout of the paper that we can see. So I'm responsible for updating that as things change. As one story falls out and one story takes its place, I'm constantly dealing with that. I'm responsive to the community. I am uh, the face of the paper, so to speak, and so I'm responsible for communicating with the public for the most part of on social media, and through email, phone calls. So I'm responding to those people. I'm monitoring if there is any developing news. We don't do a whole lot of breaking news because we don't have the resources for it. But when that need does arise, I jump on it and get that done. And we also take some community submissions as well. People will actually write stories. So a child receives a rank of an Eagle Scout, or there's a fundraiser to school, and we will, at times, as space allows, we will run those submissions. So I'm responsible for taking those, editing those for our style, getting our photos sent in. And so a lot of it really is, I spend a good bit of my day on the phone or writing stories, communicating, or planning out future issues. And so that's about it. It's really,
It sounds like all of it.
it is, yeah.
That's a lot of responsibilities
It
just for
is.
one Spartan. Now, is that just because y'all prefer to have kind of like a person that has ownership over each magazine,
We do.
or is it more like y'all kind of are just kind of limited with your resources and you're doing what you can?
Yeah, so that really changed. So in 2019, so up until 2019, the fall of 2019, we had a managing editor. Her name was Sydney Cromwell, who was doing what I just said I do as the editor for all 7 of our papers. Or for, oh, sorry, take that back, for at least 4 or 5 of our papers. We had a couple other colleagues of mine that I think technically had ownership of a couple other papers, but everyone eventually reported to her, and she handled a lot. And she was also, our readers will know her because she was the Homewood Star editor for, I think, 5 or 6 years. Started out as an intern with our company and then worked her way up all the way to the head of our editorial department. And so she spent a lot of time in Homewood, and she covered a lot of major stories. And in addition, she oversaw the rest of our news magazines. And then she left in the fall of 2019. And at that time, we had lost the other two people that I believe had, I was still relatively new, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think had some other editorial responsibilities. They had all left, and the staff that was left were the reporters for each of the papers. So we all essentially just took a big step forward. And so I became the editor in Vestavia. We had someone that had just jumped in. Ingrid Schneider was our Homewood Star reporter. She became the editor of the Homewood paper, and everybody just took a step up and assumed ownership of their paper. And so so Ingrid left to become, she joined another part of our company, and then she left to join another company. So I became the Homewood Star editor last fall. So I'm still kind of getting acclimated to the community.
How long does it take for that kind of process to happen, for you to get acclimated to, let's say, a new city?
Yeah, I really think in a lot of ways it's still going on. I still, I certainly feel better about where I am now than I did in August or September of last year, for sure. But it's
But
still,
there's a lot of people to get to know and
yeah,
relationships to create and stuff like
yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, it really is. It will probably take me at least another 5, 6 months to where I really truly feel like am as connected as I want to be. And I'm still certainly, I know the city well enough to do the job effectively, but it is certainly, it's still an ongoing process to get to know Homewood really well.
Yeah.
And
There's always more.
there's always more. There's always, and I always, thankfully, a lot of my colleagues, both in our editorial department and our sales team for advertisements, are either from here or they've spent a lot of time here. Our office is here, and so they'll always be able to help me, know who to talk to and who to speak with. And so that's really helpful. I'm still in contact with Sydney and Ingrid. Sydney actually just joined us again as a part-time copy editor, which is really helpful.
I completely understand that, because when I first started putting this show together for Homewood, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have an entry into that. So I'm very thankful to Barry Smith for kind of helping me navigate those waters.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
Great. Yeah.
Starnes Media owns a bunch of different things. How did Homewood, the Homewood Star, become a part of that? Did it exist before Starnes Media? Did Starnes Media start it?
So Starnes Media started it. So Starnes Media, Dan Starnes, our founder and publisher today, and so he bought. So 280 Living had existed before the creation, technically, of Starnes Media. Dan started really just as an employee of that newspaper, and then bought it for $10 back in, I want to say 2008. Don't hold me to that.
Bought it for $10.
Bought it for $10.
From who?
From the publisher. I think she was getting ready to retire, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So if Dan listens and I'm wrong, don't hold me to that, please, boss. So
well,
I think I'm right on that. So he took ownership of 280, and it really has just taken off over the years. So he's grown the paper. So the Homewood Star began in 2011. So we had our 10-year anniversary last year. I don't know really. I don't know the details of why Homewood or how that got started, but I mean, we really, I think, sought to fill the void left by diminishing staff over at the Birmingham News that really just this over the mountain area from Homewood Village, Mountain Brook, and to Vestavia and Hoover, really just there was a news desert, really. And so we've really filled that gap nicely.
I've heard that
over the years.
A guy talked to me after I released the Gardendale season, and he talked to me about that's true right now in North Jefferson.
It is.
Like basically from like the top of Birmingham all the way up to Coleman is like what you're saying, a news desert.
Yeah, it's a news desert, right? You had the North Jefferson News that was in existence for a while, and then they shut down. They were absorbed really by the Coleman Times, who would promise to do some news, but to my knowledge, I don't know that that's happening. So it is a little frustrating as someone who lives in Gardendale to not know where to go.
Yeah.
If I had unlimited time, I'd just do it myself.
With all of these stories going around, I know y'all do a lot of different magazines, but we're trying to keep all this targeted towards Homewood.
Yeah.
What are some of the most impactful stories that, since you've been there, that you have seen go out the door about
Yeah.
Homewood? What are some really impactful
Yeah.
stories?
So I think about one of the issues that Homewood dealt with for a really long time was the issue of downtown rezoning and changing the way that these downtown businesses are classified, and it really, without getting in the weeds of it too much, it was a multi-year issue and involved multiple entities, and residents really voiced their frustration about the possibility of bringing these huge, gigantic businesses into Homewood, and really expressed concern of losing that neighborly neighborhood feel into Homewood. They made it clear to the city council that it's just not what they want. And so shortly after, I think I took over as editor, the city council finally got to a vote on whether or not to adopt the recommendations of rezoning, which would have really changed the way the buildings are zoned down here, and unanimously voted it down and rejected it. And it was a moment, I think, for Homewood of feeling like, hey, they had an effect on their city council. Their city council listened to them.
We defeated the big
Yeah,
business.
yeah. And so, and I was not around for all of that discussion. And before I became the Homewood Star editor, was not necessarily invested in that issue. So I don't know the full details of it. But from what I do understand, I do remember reading parts of it and going, man, this is a hot topic. They're just up in arms.
It was something that the community had a strong
They had a strong
opinion on
about
it. Yeah.
And that is something I've noticed. Homewood, there's no shortage of people who will make their voices known, whether that's in, good and bad. They will express their frustrations. They also express what they love, what they don't like. And so we've covered that. Since I've been there. Right now, one of the things that Homewood is going through is considering whether or not to bring in a city manager or a city administrator, which would change the form of government. So right now you have what is the state's largest city council of 11 members and a mayor, Mayor McCluskey, who is the full-time, he is the mayor, and he's tasked with really
But he also
being
has a
full-time
full-time
running.
day job.
He has a full-time day job, right? And so he is technically responsible for the day-to-day responsibilities of the city, but he's got his own full-time job as well. And it's something that's been discussed over the years. And so now you have different committees that are studying the possibility of bringing one of these options, whether that's bringing in a city administrator like you have in Hoover that reports to the mayor, or whether it's bringing a city manager in some form. Vestavia and Mountain Brook both have city managers who operate a little bit differently, but they both have them. And so sometime possibly in the next year, Homewood residents will be able to vote on that issue.
And it'll be important for Homewood Star to be covering that and make sure everybody's informed enough to make a good vote.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's what we've got. So right now we are working on our July issue, and that is one of our covers. It's our city manager. In fact, before I headed over here, I dropped that into our folder in our server so that our designers could start laying that story out. That's going to be on the cover of our paper. We've talked to the Vestavia and Mountain Brook city managers and Hoover's mayor about their thoughts on it. Talked to Mayor McCluskey. We'll continue to cover that, not just a one-time story, but as public input meetings are held, we want to hear from the public about what do they think about it? What do the residents want? That's what the city's looking to hear as well. And so as it comes up at different committee meetings, at different council meetings, we'll continue to cover that. We'll obviously, if there is a vote sometime next year, we will obviously be covering that as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be a massive, monumental deal for the city to completely change their form of government.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think it'll be important for you guys, like we were saying, to inform everybody on that. So you mentioned y'all are monthly.
Monthly.
Okay. So is that like a paper, like y'all print it and y'all distribute it? Do people subscribe to it? How do people find the Homewood Star?
So we have a monthly print publication that goes out to all of the single family homes that have a Homewood address. And
Okay,
so,
so y'all just like
yeah,
ship
so
it out to
we
everybody.
ship it out to all of our homes. And then we do have, actually pull up the list of our racks around the city. And so we have them like Single Barrel Barbershop, Piggly Wiggly, the Homewood Chamber of Commerce, Alabama Outdoors, O'Henry's, Homewood Homewood Library typically has some. Taco Mama, New York, well, New York
So just like a businesses around town will have
businesses around
it, and
town.
just sort of community centers will
Right.
have
So
it.
community centers, businesses will have it. And so we really, we do make an effort to make sure that every home's included. Of course, you can always contact us if your home isn't, if you're not receiving it and you'd like to, we can look into that. And we are a free publication. We're not subscription based. All of our revenue comes through our digital agency and our advertising. So that's a good thing. It's, I think, really helpful for us to not have to go around and ask for subscriptions, to be able to provide really a free newspaper to people. And so it goes out to those addresses. It goes to our racks throughout the city. And so we're a monthly print publication, but we are online. We're online at the homewoodstar.com. All of our newspapers have a website, and social media. And so we're very much able to, when breaking news does happen, to post that breaking news online if it's necessary. We will cover council meetings and post those generally within a couple of days of the meeting, Chamber of Commerce meetings. Last week we were covering elections. We were covering, all across our papers and communities. We were up. I know I barely slept that night trying to get all of those stories out. And so
Verify all the numbers
yeah,
and make sure everything's
getting
correct.
comments from people, it's it's a team effort there. So we have the ability and the luxury really of being online as we need to be and being able to share some of our print stories on social media while focusing on a really nice, really a news magazine monthly print publication. So
So you have this print publication, you have your online where you guys are doing, I guess, like news articles and stuff there. Is there any exclusivity between those two? Like, oh, this goes into one but not the other?
it depends on the impact. For a lot of our papers, if it's a hyper local story about a Homewood business or a Homewood City Council meeting or a project, you're not typically going to see that in another paper because if you live in Vestavia, you more than likely are just not super interested in what
Sure.
the city of Homewood is doing. But every now and then we do. So we do have our Metro Roundup section, as we have space for it in the back of our papers each month. We will include stories that we think you might find interesting from our sister publications. And so those typically are business stories. Just because you live in Vestavia doesn't mean you're not going to come eat at Da Vinci's Pizza or, Soho. You might come down here to eat. So we'll have business stories. We'll have feature stories. We'll have stories that might have some impact in other areas featuring those papers. And then every now and then we do have stories that cross over, and that's really a big push for us now is maximizing our resources and having stories that can work across multiple papers. And so sometimes you'll have business owners who they live in Vestavia but they work in Homewood, so hey, that can work in both papers. In fact, one of my cover stories in Vestavia is on somebody that lives in Vestavia that had a statewide job. And so it's we do look for opportunities to cross over while remaining hyper local. We're not going to do it just to do it. But if it's got the ability to be a crossover story, we're going to look at it.
Yeah. So this is a challenge always is bias, right? So, I gave this example in another show where it's like if you stack a set of papers, even if there's no order, the top is going to be biased, right? Just because that's the first one that people are going to see. If it's alphabetical order, it's still biased.
Sure.
So how do you guys work to minimize bias? It's impossible to eliminate it just because it's kind of like a product of just observation, right? But how does Starnes work to minimize bias influence on what they're reporting?
Right. I think bias, being such a local paper, we don't deal with the political bias that sometimes people will think exists for, whether however true it may be in national media outlets. We don't often get accused of being conservative or liberal,
Yeah.
and I'm very thankful for that. My mental health is very thankful for that. But bias still exists even at the local level, and a lot of times what we have to push back against and what we have to make sure that we're doing is making sure that we're representing everybody, that we're not just being a voice for the city council or the mayor and city government. And that's often when we do. It doesn't happen a lot. Thankfully, I would argue that we, to the absolute best possibility, but absolute best extent we can, have eliminated bias, and we don't have it in any of our publications, Homewood included. And I think the fact that we don't hear about that a lot
Yeah.
speaks to that.
Yeah. Okay.
But when it does happen, I think it is concerns that we might just be rehashing what city council has said, or what city council wants, or what the mayor wants us to say, or what businesses want us to say, that you're missing the real story.
Mm.
Sometimes that has value. Sometimes I can look back and say, yeah, maybe we should have included another source from a different angle on this story. Sometimes I look at it and maybe the person who's saying that has a bias, and maybe we just disregard that and move on with our lives. But I do think it's important, especially in local papers, that you are representing everybody. And so, the number one, you're getting information accurately, you're confirming everything. And so, a recent example of that would be, we have a story in our June paper, which just came out, about the Homewood Firefighters Association, which has requested some cost of living increases from the city, has voiced what really has been mounting frustration for years with what they feel like is a lack of adequate pay and benefits. And so a story like that, it's obviously important to talk to the Firefighters Association and get their take. But we also reached out to Walter Jones, who's the head of the finance committee, and talked to the council president, talked to the mayor, and make sure that we get that really is a story that does have both sides. You do have well-meaning people, I believe, on both sides of that debate of, okay, what are your thoughts on this? And making sure that what we get is not only accurate, but fairly represents everybody. And I feel like I was really proud, when we sent that story out. I'm proud of that story and the work we did. It was a big effort between myself and Eric. So I think that we just work to make sure that everybody's voice is heard, that everybody who's involved in the story does get to speak their
Yeah.
piece.
Make sure that the competing voices
Yeah.
are both
Yeah.
kind of put out there. I think that makes sense. I recognize that it's a challenge because you're developing relationships with people,
Mhm.
right? And then, oh no, I've got some news that might come
Right.
out and might affect somebody,
Right.
somebody that I know, somebody that I'm friends with even.
Yeah.
So it can be a very difficult challenge to kind of like what you're saying, raise up all of these competing voices and make sure that your personal relationships and things like that are not,
Yeah.
I guess I would say, influencing or thinking.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think what you're saying, making sure that the voices that are being brought up, that hey, we've looked at both sides, we've looked at all three sides. If there's a third
Right.
angle
Yeah.
and stuff like that, like making
Yeah,
sure that
for
you're
sure.
representing each angle.
Yeah.
That's a good way to mitigate against that.
Definitely.
What do you think are some of the most valuable benefits of local media? Why is local media important?
Local media really serves as a way to connect readers to their neighbors. I mean, it connects you to what's going on in your city. If you were reading the Homewood Star, if you're reading Village Living or any of our publications, you're a Homewood resident. You know what's going on in your city. You know the concerns that people have. You know the businesses that are opening. You know the issues facing the school system. You know the city projects that are ongoing. You know the budget priorities for the upcoming year. That's something that over the summer and the next few months we'll be getting into as we get ready for the next fiscal year. These are all things that help people make decisions when they go to vote. It helps you make decisions when you're going to shop, when you're choosing what school is best for your child, when you're just wanting to know what's going on in the community. It really serves as a way, I think, to bring a sense of togetherness. You feel connected. I would hope that's the goal, at least. I'm not a Homewood resident myself, so I can't speak to that, but that is the goal, is to provide a sense of belonging and community, of hey, this is our city, and this newspaper is a reflection of that city. It's a reflection of the news that's going on. It's a reflection when we have feature stories on people that, we've written stories about children who are struggling with cancer. We've written stories about, families who've gone through horrible, horrible tragedies and have overcome that, and their place in the community. It serves as a reminder. It serves as a way, I hope, to inspire people to provide a historical record, and so it serves a lot of purposes. I think the most important really is that sense of belonging, that sense of togetherness, of, hey, this is our city. And when I'm holding this paper and I'm looking through it, I feel connected to people around me, and I know what's going on. I know what's going on in my city. I know what my government's doing. I can hold them accountable because that reporter is holding them accountable. I can know what businesses are open, and I think it just elevates the entire community when there is that transparency and that awareness of what's going on out there.
Absolutely. I think that that's a great answer for that. What about people who are out there who want to get involved in local media? How do people get involved in this?
So as an actual full-time employee or contributor, what
I guess I'm
yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how the entry point
Yeah.
works on
So
that. Do you need to go to college for it, or is this just kind of like, hey, apply for a job, write a blog for a little while, and turn that in as evidence? I don't know exactly how all this works.
yeah. So I think for the most part, we do look for college graduates who have a degree in journalism. When we're looking for reporters or photographers as well, who have a degree in photojournalism or photography. Most newspapers, most media outlets will prefer someone with a college degree. I would argue it's not necessarily essential. If you can prove to me that you can write, if you can prove that you know how to cultivate sources and you have the ability to do a good interview and write a good story, then sure. If I was, I'm not in a hiring, I don't hire people at Starnes, but I wouldn't say it's necessary, but it certainly is helpful. It certainly makes you stand out, and it is most definitely the norm and the standard is to go get a degree in journalism. I think that all of our reporters either have a degree in journalism or have a college degree of some sort with years of experience in the field, and so really it's a matter of just finding places that have jobs. It is a tough business to crack into sometimes. I waited for 2 years. I went to Montevallo and got a journalism degree, and I waited for a couple years just doing my time in retail before I got my first job, and that was at a daily newspaper in Northeast Arkansas, the Jonesboro Sun. And so I worked there for a couple years. I got my feet wet, and it was every bit what I thought it would be, of being in this old, you know, kind of nasty, newsroom. It was a little bit of a dump. They've moved buildings now, so I'm sure they're all thankful for that. But it was this old school bullpen newsroom with the desks all aligned and smelled kind of funky at night. But it was great because we all were there with a common purpose of providing news and cranking out stories on a daily basis, running around like chickens with our head cut off. It was crazy and wild. It was stressful. There were times where I hated it, but I loved it. I wouldn't go back, but I loved being there. And so being here, it's a little different. Being a monthly, not being a daily. It's not as much of the daily stress of getting the newspaper out, but there is certainly the stress of continuing to plan for the future and produce. So I would tell any up and coming journalist that really the biggest thing is to get that experience, to go apply for an internship. Starnes has, in the past have offered internships. That changes as our resources change, but we've offered internships. I know other outlets will offer internships. Go take advantage of those. Go start, as you said, go start a blog. Go talk to people and write stories yourself.
Get the experience.
Go
of
get
writing.
experience. It is so much of this job is really about experience. I'm grateful for my education. I think that a journalism degree is very helpful, and it can do a lot. But there's really no substitute for experience. You will learn more in 6 months to a year on the job than you do in 4 years in college.
Gotcha.
So it really is just about getting that experience, about being, you're going to have to be relentless as a journalist. So be relentless in trying to become a journalist and getting your name out there and writing stories, finding internships, finding part-time. Maybe it's part-time work. Maybe it's, maybe you're a contributor. That's one of the things that we're exploring right now. I can't speak too much to it because it's still very much in the development stages, but we're looking for community contributors who can help us maybe cover some meetings, maybe write 1 or 2 stories or take some photos. And while those people don't have to be trained journalists, it would be an excellent opportunity if you are looking to get a
To build
start.
relationships with people who are journalists, and to get that, like what
Yeah.
you're saying, to go ahead and get that
Yeah,
experience.
get experience, get your foot in the door.
So you pursued a journalism degree at Montevallo.
Correct.
So what made you that's a decision that you came to. You said
Right.
journalism. Yes.
Yeah.
What brought you there?
Yeah. So when I was I guess really back up. So when I was a child, I always loved reading, and I always loved writing, and just was always a passion of mine. Still is, obviously, though I don't have as much time for reading as I used to. And so at first I thought as a young child that I would become an author, and then I grew up, realized that probably is not feasible to make a living, at least until I actually get my first book published. Then maybe it'll sell millions of copies, and I can just.
I've heard that it's like, if you're not an established author, it's almost it's so
impossible.
difficult to get in
It
and
is.
get something published and on a shelf.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a dream one day. But as I grew up and started, I grew up on the Birmingham News. I grew up reading that newspaper front to cover, probably from the time I was 14 or 15, until I went off to college. And I joined staff, really just looking for an outlet to write. I joined newspaper staff in middle school in Vestavia at Pizette's, and so I started writing there. I loved it, and didn't do it my first couple years in high school, but then joined our high school staff in Vestavia my junior and senior year, where I mainly focused on sports. In fact, I think that's all I did really was sports. And for a while, thought about pursuing sports journalism, then realized I enjoy it, and I help out with our football coverage. Big sports fan, but I knew that I wanted to not be confined to that one role, and so pursued a college degree in it. And so that it really has just broadened over the years to really just love the industry as a whole and love the pursuit of truth and news and bringing good stories to people, whether it's about an event preview that's going on next month, or whether it's a hard-hitting investigative piece that's taken 2 years. Whatever it might be, I think it all has a place, and I think it makes our society better. I mean, it makes our communities better to have good journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also went to seminary?
Yeah.
So, okay, let's get a timeline here. You graduate from Montevallo, and you said
I started seminary right.
2 years of gap, or
So I
seminary
had,
in there?
Yeah, so I graduated from Montevallo in December 2013, and I'd become a Christian in college in 2009, early 2010.
So you weren't a Christian before?
I grew up in the church, and I probably would have told you that I was, but truthfully, really was just not anything meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And so God really just did a work in my life my freshman year at Montevallo to save me and bring me to faith in Christ, and became a Christian, and I served my entire college college years with our Baptist campus ministries, and was on leadership team there, and felt the call to ministry my last year at Montevallo. And so those have been my two passions really for a long time, has been journalism and Christian ministry. And so that's, right now they're able to coexist and have been for so long. At some point, God may call me to step away out of this role. We'll see. So I started seminary, though, in January of 2014. Right after I got out of Montevallo, I started at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. They had an extension center here in Birmingham, and so.
Okay, so you didn't actually go to New Orleans?
So I didn't actually have to move, right? So that was a benefit to being able to stay here and work, and really be able to focus for at least a couple of years on my education. And so I did that for 2 years. Then I moved to Arkansas, and I kept doing seminary online, which was tough. It was really tough. It's not, some people I think can maybe do that, but not having any class time whatsoever and almost no accountability, it wrecked my seminary career almost. So
Gotcha.
it took me a long time. And so I moved back in 2018. The only really big reason was I was getting married. My wife was from South Alabama, and she did not want to move to Arkansas. I didn't want to be in Arkansas anymore. I'd loved the job, but I'd just grown tired of where I was, and so we settled on Birmingham. We got the job at Starnes, and so
Meet in the middle.
meet in the middle. It really is about halfway. And so I moved back in 2018, and she moved up, and so I was able to continue seminary and then go back to the extension center, and then finished up last May. So it's been about a year now since I've been out. It took me about 7 years. It took
Just
me a
to
long
kind of
time.
like get through it, and that's because it wasn't this like a university. You have a schedule. You got to
Sure.
you're present or you're absent. Like
Right.
either you're getting credit or you're not. And with that
Yeah.
when things
Online,
shift online, it's like
it's so much about setting your own schedule and having a full-time job. Because before, in those 2 years I was here, I worked part-time in retail, and I worked anywhere from 24 to 32 hours a week, and enough to pay for school basically, and buy a cheeseburger every now and then. That was about it. And
just the occasional
yeah,
lunch.
right. Yeah. Every now and then I got to
Mostly
eat.
just starving, just occasionally.
Yeah. So I really, I was really able to focus in on my schoolwork at that time because I didn't have job responsibilities. And then I got full-time job responsibilities, and it was, oh man, this is really hard to juggle being a full-time employee
And a
and
student.
full-time student. And then after I got married, became a full-time student, full-time employee, then became a full-time editor and a full-time husband. And now, and for about eight-ish months, a full-time father to an infant. So getting to the finish line was a wild, crazy process. I had to drop out one semester, not drop out, but I had to withdraw from one semester to take care of my wife, as we were a month or so away from having our daughter. And so had to extend that timeline a little bit. And so, but I figured, hey, I'm almost at the finish line. Just push it back a little bit more. We'll get there. I've gotten there. So now so in addition to my job here, I am a member of Sharon Heights Baptist Church in Brookside, near where we live in Gardendale. And so we joined that church. I guess it probably was about a year ago. I'm not sure at the exact time, but it's probably about a year ago. And I've preached there a few times, and good friends with my pastor. I'll be starting an internship there this summer. And so that'll be in addition to my responsibilities here. So I'm really excited about that and seeing what the future holds.
Well, I think it's great that you stuck through and you finished it, like
Yeah.
even as difficult as finding the time to do all that was,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you made it.
I made it. Yeah. Somehow. Grace of God.
And you got a degree. I read this and I'm not certain what this means. It's Divinity Biblical Studies.
Right.
What is that?
So my actual degree is a Master of Divinity, which is just the name for a standard seminary degree.
Okay.
So Master of Divinities is
Sounds like a degree from Harry Potter.
It does, yeah. Sometimes may give off the wrong impression. I cannot do spells, but it's one of the standard degrees you can get as Master of Divinity. You can also get Master of Arts in Christian Education. There's a few others, but for your more theologically grounded pastoral roles, you're going to get what we just call an MDiv, a Master of Divinity. And that biblical studies is a specialization that really had me spending a lot of my electives and some extra courses I took, really focusing in on how do we learn from God's Word and how do we communicate that. And so it was very much focused on biblical interpretation, teaching and handling classes, exposition of God's Word. And so not as much on the biblical languages. Those, somehow God got me through Hebrew and Greek. It's not my forte. I wish that I loved it as much as some of my friends that have been through seminary do, but I can't. I like English. That's about it.
Learning a language is very difficult.
It is difficult, and those are two incredibly difficult languages, and they are made even more difficult to learn when you are a full-time student or full-time student, full-time employee, and have a family. It's, you know, I'm thankful for commentaries and study people
Hey.
who put out resources I can use.
Hey, I love subtitles, all right? So,
Yeah,
like, I get
there
it.
you go.
My wife is Taiwanese, and
wow.
我可以说一点中文, and that took me a long time to learn how to say.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
all I said was I can speak a little bit of Chinese.
yeah, yeah.
So that's all I got.
Yeah, yeah.
And she corrects me all the time. It's like, no, your tone is wrong. And I'm like, well, that's very interesting. So you're focusing a lot more on like the text and the narrative and sort of like the history of the Bible. Is that what that's focused
Yeah,
on?
yeah, kind of biblical application, and making sure that we're understanding God's word correctly and making sure we're applying it correctly really is if I had to sum up, kind of my heart for the church really would be, to focus in on discipleship and understanding and applying God's word, building community in the church, and then of course using the communication skills I've learned through my time in journalism and as an editor, being a team leader, um, using that as well.
Yeah.
Has really been beneficial.
What's your favorite book that you studied
Oh man,
in the Bible?
in the Bible. So one of my classes, we did an in-depth look at the book of Ephesians, and so looking back and trying to remember what all books, 'cause there were several. That was probably though the one that stuck out. Just diving into this short little book that really you can read in 30 minutes, but you can read it in 30 minutes, but you can also spend 30 years trying to get everything out of it. It's
Deep.
It's deep. It's
Yeah, a lot of
just
depth.
very rich. I mean, you get through you can take a month or so to preach through or teach through just the first 6 or 7 verses. I really enjoyed my time digging into that book and then writing papers and studying commentaries. And I also was thankful. So I took that class online, and so Jimmy Dukes, I think, was the name of my professor, and he's this older guy who's been teaching at New Orleans forever, and was one of the names that I know on faculty there. I didn't know a lot of those guys because I wasn't down there, but he's one of the names that you just hear is, oh yeah, he's been around a while. He knows his stuff, and just really enjoyed. Really great man of God, really kind. Gave me some extensions that were very much needed, if not deserved. So yeah, that was probably my most enjoyable class, looking at specific books.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Our theme for this season is how to be a good neighbor.
Mm.
What are some ways that the people of Homewood can be good neighbors to each other?
I think our world is becoming increasingly disconnected. We live on our phones. We live on social media, and we post and we share and we tweet, and COVID obviously did not help with that, as it drove everybody indoors, for legitimate and obvious reasons. But coming out of that now, I hope that maybe we've regained the need for face-to-face interaction, the need for direct communication with one another. And I think really being a good neighbor is just about caring about other people and looking at your neighbor and seeing if there anything, is there a need that I can help meet, whether that's your actual physical neighbor, or whether it's a friend or community member. Not being afraid to put yourself out there and meet a need, see a need and meet a need. I think, from my standpoint as a newspaper editor, a lot of it is what Homewood does well, and I think really better than some other cities, if not most other cities, is the people here care a lot. They care a lot about their city. Not that other residents in other cities don't, but Homewood is very passionate about Homewood. They're very vocal about their love of the city, and that's that's inspiring. I'm sure for some elected officials, sometimes it's scary. Sometimes because they'll let you know if they don't appreciate what you just did or what you voted on. And sometimes maybe in that passion, maybe they say things they shouldn't. Maybe they overstep, but it's because they care. It's because they're passionate. They love this city, and I respect that and I admire that. I think for those residents to just continue showing up and continue loving your city and continue to work to make it a better place, whether that's whether you're a business owner or a council person or just a resident who you know you see a need in the community, you can meet it. You have a story to share. We're always looking for stories to share. We're
Yep.
always looking for good news. We're always looking, even if it's not good news, even if it's something you feel needs to be said. Being a good neighbor means standing up for what's right, and I think Homewood does that well. I think it's important to continue to do that well.
All right. Great answer. What do you think that the city of Homewood should focus on next?
To focus on next, I don't want to necessarily speak for. I'm careful with my opinions here as a reporter, but
What would you call it? What do they call them? Do they call them Homewoodians? Homewooders?
I don't know. I don't know. I should. I've always just heard Homewood residents.
Okay.
I've never heard a fancy title.
Maybe.
Maybe that's what they should focus on, is coming up with a name for themselves. Um,
I nominate Homewooder.
yeah, Homewooder. We'll have a contest. I think the city manager issue will be something that will be discussed, and that's something I think residents will have to examine the possibilities that are before them, and we'll have to examine what the city. They'll need to make their voices known. I would say don't wait until it's time to vote. These public input meetings that are going to be held, I would assume sometime this summer. Show up. If you want your voice to be heard, show up. One of the frustrations that sometimes I have, just as a person, and then even as an editor, is we hear probably more than anybody about how frustrated people are. But then I attend city council meetings that don't have people in them, and you see low voter turnout, and you see low feedback, and to me, you can't complain because you're not showing up, and so the people.
So there's this disconnect there of like
Right.
people will talk about it and they'll advocate for what they think should be done, but they
Right.
won't take it to that next step of like
Right.
going
You
to the
gotta.
place where the action is happening.
Correct. And I think, being involved in these meetings because you really are going to have uh, three options to choose from as far as what you want your next form of government to be, or to remain the way it is. You want to make your voice heard as to what that should be. I would attend every meeting you can. I would attend every time you can attend, or reach out to your city council person and make your voice heard. Go vote whenever it's time to vote, because it will change the way the city is run. It will change who is responsible for what. One of the things that could happen is the council could decrease in size. I do not think it will increase. It's already the largest in the state, but it could decrease in size. So we're talking a big change as far as who represents you.
Cutting your representation in half.
You could see representation, not necessarily representation cut, but the number of council members cut. People will still be represented, but the person might change.
Gotcha.
And the person who is responsible for running the day to day of your city might change. Your priorities might change. So this is a big thing, and I would encourage everyone to read up on it and get involved and be familiar with what's going on. Certainly, as an unbiased there, I'm not recommending anything, but I will recommend just being involved and being aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it will change the city, and it will be a big thing.
Gotcha. So homewooders should focus on paying more attention and speaking out.
Yeah, I would think that's a good start. I think, from a city standpoint, I know that there is sometimes a question, and a lot of what we see is certain neighborhoods feel that they are not regarded as highly as others. a lot of people in Rosedale have felt that way, that they are being disregarded. And we've written about that. I haven't personally written a whole lot about it, but it's been written about by both of the two women who preceded me. And so that's something that will, I'm sure, continue to come up, of making sure that there's fair representation, especially for a district that is a majority Black district, of making sure that they're treated fairly and that they're included in really what is an ever-changing city that continues to expand and continues to see more businesses come in and higher quality of life. But I mean, we hear it, West Homewood, Edgewood, downtown, all the districts, at some point or another, people feel like they're left out. And I think that's something, whether that's true or not is not my place to say. But I think that's something that you always, whether you're a city leader or whether you are a resident, it's something to pay attention to. It's something because in theory, you want everyone to feel represented. You don't want someone to feel left out.
That's absolutely true.
And maybe that's coming from people who have an axe to grind, and it's unfair. Maybe it's legitimate. Part of our job is obviously to tell that if it's true, but it's hard to differentiate between facts and feelings sometimes. That is part of the job for us. But if people feel that way, I'd imagine that it's concerning for city leaders, and I think that's something you always want to take seriously, especially when you have a city that really does have unique identities. I think throughout the downtown area and Edgewood and Rosedale, and you've got these 4 distinct areas that all lend really beautiful, important things to Homewood, to make sure that they really are represented. Because that's something as a newspaperman that I'm going to pay attention to. It's something that will drive our stories if there is, a lack of parity. And it's also going to drive residents to be frustrated. So I think that's the one thing I would say, to look out for.
All right. Was there anything that you wanted to close out with before we end the show?
I don't think so. I appreciate you having me on. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for thinking of us.
I feel like you and I are a little bit in the same category. We're both trying to promote local media and promote local community and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I thought it could be a good opportunity to talk to somebody who's kind of like been at this mission longer than I have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Your City podcast, and I hope you enjoyed our talk today with Neal. If you enjoyed the show, you can help us out by supporting the show by donating on PayPal using the link in the description to help us keep making the show and improving it. There's more that we would like to do with this idea, and we would appreciate any support in helping us achieve our goal of creating better communities, not just for Homewood, but for other cities as well. Thank you again for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.